My name's Simon Caulkin. I'm a management writer and business writer, and I'm interested in new ideas because I firmly believe that we've come to the end of the road with the financial crash of the ideas that have brought us this far. So where do we look for new ideas? Well, there are, I'm glad to say, some around, and I'd like to ask one or two questions here of Donal Carroll, who's written a book that I rate rather highly. But that's my opinion. Let's see what Don thinks. So, Donal, what's special about your book?
What's special about it is we help organizations ask this question: does the thinking which got you here get you further? And if it doesn't, what are you going to do about it? It suggests that to get to your next stage of development faster, you have choices over your models, which is how you organize effort, your management model, how you create value, your business model, and how you mobilize thinking, your learning model, together. And you can make explicit choices about these. Organizations have them by default, but things have changed. They might want to re-establish those. And also, the methods we use, which are value creating, means that this is done with them, and eventually they do it with themselves rather than to them. So it creates independence, and it also increases organizational capability. So they won't need consultants.
So you don't need consultants. That's great. But tell us what organizations actually do as a result of using your ideas that they wouldn't be doing already. What are they having to think about here?
These three models take the form of self-assessment grids where they identify where they are now in terms of business management and learning, and where they want to be now and in the future. So it asks them to map out how they live intentionally, so they live on purpose, so they can identify that and harness the necessary energy and vision to do it. But also, it enables them to tackle the barriers to where they need to be. So it will outline those quite specifically.
Okay, and can you give us an example or two of the organisations that you've looked at that have moved quickly to the next phase of development?
When organisations began to use these models, it took them a while to get realistic information and accurate information rather than wishful information into them. But one example was how two of the established organizations would use customers in a better way. So they would use customer-generated contributions either for new products, for new services, or for new ideas, or for greater feedback. And this meant not just a change in the business model where they created greater value for customers, but also how they managed that and how they learned, because they have to listen, which all organizations claim to do, but don't do very well. So that was one example.
That's interesting. I mean, one of the things that you mention in the book is the need to get everyone in the organization contributing, not just the movers and shakers or the people at the top. Am I right in thinking that one of the things that you're trying to do is with the models, is to release a kind of charge of energy and ambition?
We are, and this was helped immensely by what we meant and in explaining how organizations could and should mobilize thinking. We took that as a deliberate phrase because when organizations hear about learning, it's passive, it's thrown off to HR as human resources or human remains. It's highly individualized and it doesn't produce collective learning. When we put together the staff in these individual organizations, there was a much greater acceleration of decision-making and problem-solving than when we interviewed people individually, so that collectively they were greater than the sum of their parts. But we call that particular stage enabling people to learn collectively together far better. I mean, it's blockbuster term is contestation, but it's arguing out development where everybody's on side in order to make them more resilient and more agile. And that worked very well. So we would underline the idea of collective learning. The organizations that can learn collectively with more alacrity will be better performing faster.
In other words, the organisation that learns together develops together.
This is not an easy journey. I mean, much of it happened in this room, where staff were irritated or annoyed that their ways of enabling and developing the organisation weren't being used, and the capacity and the potential was already there. So it wasn't a particularly difficult outcome to enable. The resources were already there. That's why one of the managers said this is a bit like career guidance for organizations. It is, but you have to construct a range of choices, many of which are not terribly palatable and involve struggle, and also unlearning the ones that aren't going to enable you to develop.
As a reader, I would say one of the strengths of the book is that it's not about IBM and it's not about BP and Nokia or even Apple. It's about small organizations coming to grips with their own problems and issues and working through them. And I think that's a big strength. It is a very lively read. It's not the same as many of the business books you'll read, with very different examples and thinking of real organisations at a real stage of their existence. Okay, that's perhaps a good point to finish, and I think it's an important way of saying that this is a book that you need to look at.